Crystal glasses chimed against the low hum of dangerous men pretending to be gentlemen. The chandelier light caught the sharp edge of Leo's jaw as he watched his wife from across the crowded room. She was speaking to the governor, offering a polite, practiced curve of her lips. Leo didn't care about the politics, the money, or the optics. He leaned in, his voice a quiet rasp that cut through the jazz playing in the corner. Smile at him again, and we're leaving. The mayor's annual charity gala was a masterclass in hypocrisy. 300 of the city's wealthiest residents packed into the grand ballroom of the Beaumont Hotel, sipping imported champagne and writing tax-deductible checks to save wetlands they would happily pave over tomorrow. Nora stood near a towering arrangement of white hydrangeas, letting the mindless chatter wash over her. Her feet ached. The heels of her Louboutins felt like polished daggers digging into her heels, but she kept her posture rigid. She wore a backless gown of midnight silk, a garment designed entirely for Leo's benefit. It marked her as his. Everyone in the room knew it. Governor Richard Hayes leaned in too close. He smelled of scotch, expensive mints, and the distinct, stale sweat of a man who was desperate for campaign funds. "Your husband is a difficult man to reach, Nora," Hayes said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. He let his eyes linger on her collarbone, a fraction of a second too long. "I've sent 3 envoys to his office this week. All turned away." "Leo values his time, Richard." Nora offered a thin, mechanical smile. It didn't reach her eyes. She knew exactly what Hayes wanted. He needed the union votes down at the docks, and only Leo could deliver them. But Hayes also wanted to play the crusader against organized crime on the evening news. He wanted to eat at the devil's table and keep his hands clean. "I'm sure he does," Hayes chuckled, leaning closer. The ambient noise of the ballroom, the clinking silver, the soft brush of a snare drum from the jazz band, seemed to fade as the governor invaded her personal space. "But surely a woman of your influence could whisper in his ear. Remind him that friends in the State House are good for business." Nora didn't flinch. She had grown up in this world. She knew how to handle men who thought a title made them bulletproof. "I don't involve myself in my husband's business, and he doesn't involve himself in my charities. It's a very traditional arrangement." "A shame," Hayes murmured. He reached out, his thick fingers lightly grazing her bare shoulder, under the pretense of brushing away a stray piece of lint. "You're wasted as a simple housewife, Nora. Truly." The air in the room shifted. It wasn't a sudden drop in temperature or a dramatic gust of wind. It was a localized change in atmospheric pressure. Nora didn't have to turn her head to know Leo was moving. She could track his progress through the ballroom simply by watching the way the crowd parted. Men in tuxedos stepped back, their conversations dying in their throats. Women averted their eyes. Leo Castiglione didn't command respect. He extracted it. He materialized at her side. He was taller than the governor, broader in the shoulders, wearing a bespoke suit that cost more than the average car. His face was a study in controlled violence. Sharp cheekbones, dark eyes that held absolutely no warmth, and a jaw set like a steel trap. "Governor," Leo said. He didn't offer his hand. Hayes swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing over his silk tie. The flush of alcohol on his cheeks was rapidly replaced by a pale, chalky sheen. "Leo, good to see you. We were just discussing the preservation fund." "Were you?" Leo didn't phrase it as a question. His gaze slid from the governor's nervous face down to the spot on Nora's shoulder where Hayes's hand had rested seconds ago. Nora felt the familiar, suffocating weight of Leo's possessiveness wrap around her throat. She offered Hayes another tight diplomatic smile, attempting to defuse the ticking bomb standing next to her. "Richard was just leaving to speak with the zoning commissioner, darling." Leo stepped forward. He didn't look at the governor. He leaned down, his mouth hovering just an inch from Nora's ear. The scent of him, cedar, bergamot, and a faint metallic trace of gunpowder, overpowered the cloying perfume of the ballroom. "Smile at him again and we're leaving," Leo warned. His voice was barely a whisper, a rough rasp that sent an involuntary shiver down her spine. Nora kept her expression blank. "Don't make a scene, Leo. Not here." "I don't make scenes, Nora. I make examples." Leo finally turned his dark gaze onto the governor. "Walk away, Richard, while you still have the legs to do it." Hayes didn't argue. He muttered a disjointed apology, practically tripping over the hem of a passing socialite's dress as he scrambled toward the nearest exit. Leo watched him go, his expression unreadable. Without a word, he placed a heavy possessive hand on the small of Nora's bare back. His skin was warm against hers, a stark contrast to the coldness in his eyes. "Get your coat," Leo ordered quietly. "We're done here." Nora didn't protest. Arguing with Leo in public was a zero-sum game. She turned and walked toward the coat check, her spine straight, ignoring the dozens of eyes burning holes into her back. The charity gala continued behind them, a room full of monsters pretending the biggest one hadn't just bared his teeth. The drive back to the estate was suffocating. The interior of the armored SUV felt less like a vehicle and more like a mobile vault. The glass was 2 inches thick, tinting the passing streetlights of the city into blurry, distorted streaks of yellow and red. Rain had begun to fall, drumming a steady, hollow rhythm against the reinforced steel roof. Nora sat as far to the left as the leather bench would allow, staring out the window. The privacy partition between them and the driver, Thomas, was up. It was just the two of them, trapped in a heavy, pressurized silence. She reached up, pressing 2 fingers to her temple where a dull ache was beginning to bloom. "You humiliated me," she said, her voice flat, devoid of the theatrical anger she had used in the early years of their marriage. She was too tired for theater now. Leo was sitting with his legs parted, his elbows resting on his knees as he stared at his own hands. He had unbuttoned his suit jacket, revealing the dark leather shoulder holster strapped over his white shirt. The steel grip of his sidearm caught the passing streetlights. He didn't look at her. "He touched you." "He brushed a piece of lint off my shoulder, Leo. He's a politician. He's greasy, and he's tactile. That's how they operate. He was looking at you like you were something he could buy." Leo turned his head slowly. The shadows in the car carved deep, harsh lines into his face. "And you smiled at him." "It's called networking," Nora shot back, finally meeting his gaze. Her cynicism flared, a defense mechanism she had honed to perfection. "It's called playing the game so the feds don't look too closely at your shipping manifests. You think I want to stand there and listen to Richard Hayes talk about his golf handicap? I do it for you. I don't need you to whore yourself out for my business." The word hit the air between them like a physical blow. Nora stiffened, her jaw clenching. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. Instead, she let out a short, bitter laugh. "Is that what you think I'm doing?" she asked softly. "You put me in this dress. You parade me around these galas to show the city that Leo Castiglione is civilized, that he has a beautiful, educated wife who serves on museum boards. And when I actually do the job, when I play the civilized wife, you threaten to cripple the governor of the state." Leo exhaled, a ragged breath that sounded exhausted. He leaned back against the leather seat, running a heavy hand over his jaw. The anger in his eyes was still there, burning low and hot, but it was tangled with something else. Something jagged and insecure. "Hayes is under investigation," Leo said, his voice dropping to a gravelly monotone. "The state attorney is building a racketeering case against his office. By next month, half his staff will be wearing wires. I didn't pull you away because I'm jealous, Nora. I pulled you away because he's radioactive and he was trying to use you as a human shield." Nora blinked, processing the information. The sudden pivot from jealous husband to calculating boss gave her mental whiplash. "Why didn't you just tell me that before we went?" "Because you wouldn't have gone. And we needed to be seen tonight. We needed to look unbothered. So you left me in the dark. Again." Nora looked back out the window. The glittering skyline of the city was fading, replaced by the dark, winding roads of the suburbs. "I protect you," Leo said. It wasn't an apology. It was a statement of fact, carved in stone. "You manage me, Leo. There's a difference." He didn't reply. He reached across the center console and poured a neat measure of whiskey from a crystal decanter into a short glass. He offered it to her. She looked at the amber liquid, then at his hand. His knuckles were slightly bruised, a faint yellowish purple fading near the joints. A reminder that his business wasn't just shipping manifests and political bribes. It was blood. It was always blood. Nora took the glass. Their fingers brushed. His skin was rough, calloused. "Don't smile at him again, Nora," Leo said, staring at her lips. The political justification was gone. The raw, territorial edge was back in his voice. "If he survives the indictments, and I see him look at you like that again, I won't just tell him to walk away. I'll take his eyes." Nora took a slow sip of the whiskey. It burned a path down her throat, settling heavily in her stomach. She knew he wasn't exaggerating. That was the tragedy of their marriage. He loved her with a violence that terrified her, and God help her. A dark, cynical part of her craved the weight of it. She rested her head against the cold glass of the window, watching the rain streak down. "Just get us home, Leo." The Castiglione estate sat on 40 acres of heavily wooded land behind a 10-foot wrought iron gate. As the SUV approached, the heavy gates groaned open, revealing a sweeping gravel driveway lined with towering, ancient oaks. Two men in dark raincoats stood by the guardhouse. They were holding rifles, the barrels pointed downward, but ready. Nora watched them as the car rolled past. They nodded to the vehicle, their faces blank. This was her reality, a golden cage guarded by men who wouldn't hesitate to pull the trigger. The car stopped beneath the grand portico of the main house. The front door opened before Thomas even put the car in park, and the head of security, a broad-shouldered man named Dominic, stepped out with an umbrella. Leo waved Dominic off. He didn't wait for his door to be opened. He stepped out into the rain, walked around the back of the SUV, and pulled Nora's door open himself. He offered his hand. Nora looked at it for a second before taking it. She stepped out, the chill of the damp night air biting into her exposed skin. She shivered. Instantly, Leo shrugged off his suit jacket and draped it over her shoulders. The jacket was massive on her, retaining the heat of his body and smelling sharply of his cologne and whiskey. They walked in silence up the marble steps and into the grand foyer. The house was cavernous, silent, and excessively opulent. Marble floors, vaulted ceilings, and priceless art hung on the walls. It felt more like a museum than a home. "Go to bed," Leo said, unstrapping his shoulder holster. He laid the leather rig and the heavy firearm on a silver tray on the entry table, a surreal juxtaposition against the delicate floral arrangement sitting next to it. "I have calls to make." Nora paused at the base of the sweeping staircase. Her feet were screaming in the Louboutins. She reached down, unclasping the delicate straps, and stepped out of the shoes. She picked them up, holding them in one hand. She turned to look at him. Leo was rolling up the sleeves of his white shirt, his forearms thick with muscle and dark ink. He looked exhausted. The ruthless mask he wore for the city was slipping, revealing the heavy, grinding toll of holding on to an empire. "Who are you calling at 2 a.m?" Nora asked. "Dominic needs to sweep the perimeter, and I need to talk to our friends in the DA's office. I want to know exactly what Hayes has given them." Nora walked back toward him, her bare feet silent on the cold marble. She stopped a few feet away. "Is it bad, Leo? The indictments?" Leo looked up. He studied her face, his dark eyes tracing the line of her jaw, the slight smudge of her mascara. "It's a headache. I handle headaches. You said he might use me as a human shield." "He won't get the chance." "Because you'll blind him?" she asked, a dry, cynical edge to her voice. Leo didn't smile. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them. He reached out, his large hands resting on her waist, pulling her flush against him. The heavy silk of her dress slipped against his cotton shirt. "Because I won't let anyone touch what's mine," he murmured. Nora looked up at him. She hated the word mine. She hated the archaic, barbaric reality of their world. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw the frantic, obsessive fear buried beneath the anger. He wasn't just a possessive mob boss. He was a man terrified of losing his only anchor. "Unzip me," she said quietly. Leo's eyes darkened. He reached around her, his fingers finding the small, hidden zipper at the base of her spine. He pulled it down slowly, his knuckles brushing against her bare skin. The touch was agonizingly gentle, entirely at odds with the violence she knew his hands were capable of. The silk dress loosened, the tension across her chest releasing. She let out a long, quiet breath. "You're safe here," Leo whispered, pressing his lips to the crown of her head. "No one is safe in this house, Leo," Nora replied, her voice soft but brutally honest. She stepped back, letting his jacket fall from her shoulders, catching it before it hit the floor. She turned and walked toward the stairs. "Don't stay up too late. The Empire will still be there tomorrow." She climbed the stairs, the cold marble freezing her soles, leaving the most dangerous man in the city standing alone in the grand foyer, watching her walk away. Morning in the Castiglione estate arrived without warmth. The storm from the night before had passed, leaving behind a brittle, washed-out sky and a biting wind that rattled the heavy glass panes of the master bedroom. Nora woke alone. She rolled over onto the expanse of Egyptian cotton, her hand brushing the cold, undisturbed sheets on Leo's side of the bed. He hadn't come up. She lay there for a long moment, staring at the ceiling, listening to the absolute silence of the house. It was a suffocating kind of quiet, the kind that cost tens of millions of dollars to maintain. No traffic, no neighbors. Just the distant, rhythmic crunch of gravel as the perimeter patrol made their rounds. She threw back the covers and walked to the ensuite bathroom. The woman in the mirror looked pale, the shadows under her eyes a stark contrast to the perfectly manicured facade she had worn hours earlier at the Beaumont Hotel. She stripped off her silk nightgown, stepped into the shower, and turned the water as hot as she could stand it. She wanted to scrub the smell of the ballroom, the expensive gin, the sickly sweet perfume, Richard Hayes's stale sweat, off her skin. Downstairs, the house was already functioning with the quiet, militaristic precision Leo demanded. Nora descended the main staircase in a cashmere sweater and dark jeans, her wet hair clinging to her neck. The kitchen was a sprawling masterpiece of stainless steel and black granite. Maria, the housekeeper who had been with Leo since before they were married, was standing by the espresso machine. She was a small, fiercely loyal woman who saw everything and said nothing. "Good morning, Mrs. Castiglione," Maria said, turning with a steaming mug in hand. Black, 2 sugars. Exactly how Nora drank it. "Morning, Maria. Is he still in his study?" "Since 3 a.m., Maria replied, her voice low. She didn't offer pity. Pity was dangerous in this house. She simply handed Nora the coffee and turned back to wiping down an already spotless counter. Nora took a sip, the caffeine hitting her system with a sharp jolt. She walked down the long, Persian-carpeted hallway toward the back of the house. The heavy oak door to Leo's study was cracked open an inch. She pushed it gently. The room smelled of old paper, leather, and the harsh, metallic tang of an extinguished cigar. Leo was sitting behind a massive mahogany desk, his back to the door. He was staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the manicured lawn sloping down toward the tree line. He was still wearing the white shirt from the night before, though the sleeves were rolled up past his elbows, the dark ink of his tattoos standing out against his olive skin. Dominic stood near the fireplace, a phone pressed to his ear. He saw Nora enter and gave a short, curt nod. He mumbled a quick affirmative into the receiver and hung up. "The warrants were executed at dawn, boss," Dominic said, his gravelly voice breaking the heavy silence of the room. "Hayes's office, his brownstone in the city, the feds boxed out the state police. It's an FBI show now." Leo didn't turn around. "And Hayes?" "In custody. They dragged him out of bed. The 6 o'clock news is running the footage on a loop. He looked like he was going to vomit on the sidewalk." Nora stood frozen near the doorway. The reality of Leo's warning last night settled over her like a lead weight. He's radioactive. Leo finally swiveled his chair around. His eyes found Nora instantly. The bags under his eyes were deep, the lines around his mouth carved in exhaustion, but his gaze was sharp, calculating. "Dominic, give us a minute," Leo ordered. Dominic didn't hesitate. He bypassed Nora, stepping quietly out of the room and pulling the heavy oak door shut behind him with a soft click. "You didn't sleep," Nora said, stepping further into the room. "There was a shift in the board. I had to secure our pieces." Leo leaned back, rubbing a hand over his face. The stubble on his jaw caught the weak morning light. Hayes is a liability. He's weak. He'll panic, and when men like that panic, they start trading names for a reduced sentence. Will he trade yours? Leo let out a short, humorless laugh. He doesn't have the leverage. We routed the campaign contributions through 3 separate shell corporations, all legally insulated. My name isn't on a single document he has. Then why have you been up all night? Leo stopped rubbing his jaw. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and the cold corporate facade slipped for just a fraction of a second. Because the feds are looking for a crack, Nora. They don't just want a corrupt governor. They want the men who bought him. They want me. Nora took a step forward, resting her mug on the edge of his desk. The cynicism she wore like armor felt heavy today. So, what does this mean for us? More guards at the gate? More armored cars? It means you stay home for the next few weeks. You cancel the museum galas, you cancel the luncheons. Nora stiffened. The cage was shrinking. I have obligations, Leo. If I suddenly drop off the face of the earth, it looks like we're hiding. It looks like guilt. It looks like you have a summer cold, Leo corrected, his voice dropping into that quiet, dangerous register. I'm not asking for your opinion on the PR strategy, Nora. You're staying behind the gates until I know exactly what Hayes has given them. Nora stared at him. The man sitting across from her wasn't the husband who had gently unzipped her dress the night before. This was the boss. The man who viewed her as a vital asset that needed protecting, rather than a partner. I'm not one of your shipments, Leo, she said, her voice tight. You can't just lock me in a vault until the heat dies down. I can, he replied, his face entirely unreadable. And I will, because if they can't get to me through paper, they'll try to get to me through you. By Tuesday afternoon, the house felt like a mausoleum holding its breath. Nora sat in the solarium, a bright glass-enclosed room filled with tropical plants that Maria meticulously maintained. It was the only room in the house that felt alive. She had her laptop open on the rattan glass table, ostensibly reviewing the budget proposals for the children's hospital wing. Here Foundation was funding. The numbers blurred together. She couldn't focus. The television in the corner was muted. The closed captions scrolling frantically beneath the sweating face of a federal prosecutor holding a press conference. They were calling it the biggest corruption sweep in the state's history. Richard Hayes had officially been denied bail. The anchor's graphic listed the alleged crimes: wire fraud, extortion, racketeering. Nora snapped the laptop shut. The sharp crack echoed in the glass room. She was a hypocrite. That was the bitter truth she swallowed every morning with her coffee. She sat in this beautiful house, wearing designer clothes, donating millions to sick children, all funded by the blood and extortion happening down at the shipping yards. She justified it by telling herself she was doing good with the money, that she was balancing the cosmic scales. But watching the news, seeing the systemic rot her husband orchestrated, the scales felt hopelessly, disgustingly broken. The glass doors of the solarium slid open. Dominic stepped in. He wasn't wearing his usual tailored suit. He wore black tactical gear, a heavy vest strapped over his chest, a sidearm holstered on his thigh. Nora's heart gave a violent, painful thump against her ribs. The tactical gear meant a threat was no longer theoretical. It was localized. Mrs. Castiglione, Dominic said, his voice flat. We need to move you away from the windows. Nora stood up, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. What's happening? A vehicle just breached the outer checkpoint on the access road. They didn't stop for the gate guards. Dominic stepped closer, placing a heavy hand on her elbow, guiding her toward the interior doors. The boss is on his way back from the city, but until he gets here, protocol dictates we move you to the safe room. Who is it? Nora demanded, pulling her arm out of his grip. She hated being manhandled. She hated being blind. Is it the FBI? The FBI knocks with a warrant, Dominic said grimly. They don't run checkpoints. We don't know who it is yet. Move, Nora, now. The use of her first name snapped her into reality. Dominic never breached formality unless things were falling apart. She didn't argue. She walked briskly ahead of him, moving out of the solarium and into the grand hallway. The house was transforming before her eyes. The heavy steel shutters, hidden seamlessly within the window frames, were beginning to lower with a low, mechanical hum, sealing out the daylight. Security personnel she had never seen before materialized from the lower levels, moving with silent, terrifying speed toward the front of the house, rifles raised. The illusion of the civilized estate was gone. This was a fortress bracing for a siege. Dominic led her to the library. He moved to the massive bookshelf on the far wall, pressing his thumb against a biometric scanner hidden behind a leather-bound encyclopedia set. The shelf clicked and swung outward, revealing a heavy steel door. Inside, Dominic ordered, punching a code into the keypad. The door hissed open. The safe room was a concrete box, outfitted with ventilation, communication arrays, and enough supplies to last a week. It was sterile, cold, and smelled faintly of copper. Nora stopped at the threshold. Panic, cold and sharp, finally clawed its way up her throat. Where is Leo? Exactly. He's 10 minutes out, Dominic said, pushing her gently inside. Sit tight. I'll come get you when it's clear. The heavy steel door slammed shut, the locking mechanism engaging with a deafening clack. Nora was alone in the fluorescent glare of the bunker. She wrapped her arms around herself, sinking onto the small cot in the corner. The silence down here was absolute. She couldn't hear the guards. She couldn't hear the alarms. If the house above her was burning, she wouldn't know until the smoke came through the vents. She stared at her shaking hands. This was the cost of the midnight silk dresses. This was the tax on the diamonds. 10 minutes bled into 20, then 30. The digital clock on the wall mocked her, the red numbers ticking away in the silence. Finally, the radio on the steel desk crackled to life. It was a private frequency, laced with static. Dominic to safe room. Do you copy? Nora scrambled off the cot, lunging for the desk. She grabbed the heavy black receiver, pressing the button on the side. I'm here. I copy. What happened? There was a pause. Stand clear of the door. The boss is coming down. Nora dropped the receiver. She backed away as the heavy deadbolts began to disengage one by one. The door swung open. Leo stood in the doorway. He was breathing hard. The bespoke suit he had worn into the city was ruined. The jacket was gone. The crisp white shirt was torn at the shoulder, a spreading bloom of dark crimson soaking into the cotton fabric. His knuckles were raw, split open and bleeding, but it was his eyes that terrified her. They were completely hollow, stripped of the calculating businessman, stripped of the jealous husband. They were the eyes of an animal that had just survived a slaughter. He stepped into the bunker, the heavy door closing behind him. Nora couldn't speak. Her eyes were glued to the blood on his shoulder. It wasn't the feds, Leo said, his voice a ragged rasp that echoed off the concrete walls. He leaned heavily against the steel desk, a wince tightening his jaw. It was the Moretti family. They thought with Hayes going down, our political cover was blown. They thought we were weak. "Are you shot?" Nora finally choked out, moving toward him. Leo looked down at his shoulder, as if he had just noticed the wound. A graze. The glass from the windshield did most of the damage. They ambushed the motorcade 3 miles out. He looked back up at her. The adrenaline was draining out of him, leaving a pale, shivering exhaustion in its wake. "The estate is secure. They didn't get past the front lawn. Dominic handled it." Nora reached out, her trembling fingers hovering over his torn shirt. She could smell the gunpowder on him now, thick and acrid, mixed with the metallic scent of fresh blood. "Sit down," she whispered, guiding him toward the cot. Leo didn't resist. He sat down heavily, resting his elbows on his knees, his head dropping into his hands. "I told you I'd protect you." "You need a doctor, Leo." "No doctors," he snapped, his head snapping up. The violence was still simmering just below the surface. "We bring a doctor in, word gets out that I was hit. I need to project strength right now. I need them to know I'm breathing." Nora stared at him. The sheer, terrifying absurdity of his logic made her want to scream. He was bleeding on a cot in a concrete bunker, worrying about his optics. She walked over to the steel cabinet mounted on the wall and pulled out the advanced trauma kit. She brought it to the bed, flipping it open. Inside were bandages, antiseptics, and a surgical stapler. She had never used them, but she knew what they were for. Every mob wife knew what they were for. "Take off your shirt," she commanded. Her voice had lost its tremble. The panic was receding, replaced by a cold, cynical resignation. This was her husband. This was her life. Leo looked at her, his dark eyes searching her face. He slowly began to unbutton his shirt with his good hand. Nora pushed his hand away. "Let me," she said. She undid the buttons, her fingers brushing against his hot, sweat-slicked skin. She peeled the fabric back, wincing at the jagged tear in his shoulder. It was deep, a messy gouge where a high-caliber bullet had grazed the muscle. It was bleeding sluggishly. She poured antiseptic onto a gauze pad. "This is going to hurt." Leo didn't blink. "I'm used to it." Nora pressed the gauze hard into the wound. Leo let out a sharp, guttural hiss through clenched teeth, his entire body going rigid. His free hand shot out, gripping her hip with bruising force, grounding himself in the pain. Nora didn't flinch away from his grip. She kept the pressure on the wound, watching the muscles in his jaw bunch and jump. "You're a fool, Leo," she said quietly, the harsh words contrasting with the gentle way she wiped the blood from his chest. "You think you can fight the government and the Morettis at the same time? You think a 10-foot gate keeps us safe?" "I keep us safe," Leo ground out, his grip on her hip tightening. "You nearly died on a highway today," Nora countered, her voice finally breaking. A single tear slipped down her cheek, falling onto his bare chest. "You nearly left me alone in this cage." Leo's breath hitched. He reached up, his bloody hand gently cupping her jaw, his thumb wiping the tear away. The blood smeared against her pale skin. "I'm not going anywhere," he whispered fiercely, his eyes burning into hers. "I will burn this city to the bedrock before I leave you." Nora looked into those dark, obsessed eyes and felt a terrifying truth settle deep in her bones. He meant it. He would destroy the world to keep her. And she, God help her, was going to let him. The aftermath of the Moretti ambush was a masterclass in organized silence. By nightfall, the wrecked vehicles on the access road had been towed to a private chop shop. The blood on the gravel was washed away by the returning rain. The bodies, 3 Moretti soldiers, were gone, disappeared into the dark, churning waters of the harbor. The police were never called. The news reported a brief gang-related shootout on an isolated stretch of road, with no injuries found at the scene. In the master bathroom, Nora finished taping a fresh gauze pad over Leo's shoulder. He sat on the edge of the marble bathtub, stripped to the waist, staring blankly at the floor. He hadn't spoken since they left the safe room. The adrenaline crash had hit him hard, leaving him hollowed out, a ghost haunting his own house. "It needs stitches," Nora said, breaking the silence. She threw the bloody wipes into the trash bin. "The butterfly strips will hold it for now, but if you tear it open again—" "I won't," Leo muttered. He stood up, towering over her. He reached out and touched her cheek, his thumb grazing the spot where his own blood had dried on her skin earlier. "Wash your face, Nora." She looked at him in the mirror. She looked like Lady Macbeth. She turned on the gold faucet and scrubbed her skin until it was red and stinging. When she came out of the bathroom, Leo was standing by the bedroom window, holding a glass of whiskey. He had put on a fresh, dark t-shirt. The heavy steel shutters had been raised, allowing the moonlight to spill across the floor. "What happens now?" Nora asked, wrapping her arms around her waist. The temperature in the room felt freezing, despite the thermostat. Leo took a slow sip of the amber liquid. "Moretti sent a message. Now I send one back. But first, I have to secure our flanks. The DA is pushing Hayes hard. If he breaks, the federal indictments drop. So we're fighting a war on 2 fronts." "I am," Leo corrected softly, turning to face her. "You are staying out of it." Before Nora could argue the absurdity of that statement, she had just bandaged a bullet wound in a bunker. The intercom on the bedside table buzzed. It was a harsh, jarring sound. Leo frowned. He walked over and pressed the button. "What?" Dominic's voice came through the speaker, tight and low. "Boss, you have a visitor at the front gate." "I told you no one gets in," Leo snapped. "Send them away. If they argue, shoot out their tires." "You might want to rethink that, boss," Dominic replied cautiously. "It's Inspector Wallace, State Police Organized Crime Task Force. He's alone, unarmed, and holding a white flag." Leo went perfectly still. The air in the room instantly grew heavy. Inspector James Wallace was the man who had been hunting Leo for a decade. He was smart, incorruptible, and painfully patient. If Wallace was at the gate, it meant the rules of engagement had just fundamentally changed. "Put him in the study," Leo said finally. "Check him for wires twice. If he twitches, break his jaw." He released the button and drained his whiskey in one swallow. "You're letting a state inspector into the house?" Nora asked, horrified. "Now, while you're bleeding?" "If I turn him away, he comes back with a SWAT team at dawn," Leo said, setting the glass down with a sharp clink. He grabbed a dark sweater from the closet, carefully pulling it over his injured shoulder to hide the bandages. "He knows about the ambush. He's here to gloat, or he's here to offer a deal. Leo," he stopped at the door, looking back at her, "lock the bedroom door. Do not come downstairs." Nora watched him leave, the door clicking shut behind him. She stood in the center of the vast room for a long minute, listening to the heavy silence of the house. Do not come downstairs. It was an order, a command from the boss. But Nora was tired of being managed. She was tired of being the porcelain doll kept on a high shelf while the house burned down around her. She walked to the door, unlocked it, and stepped quietly into the hallway. She didn't wear shoes. Her bare feet made no sound on the thick runners as she crept down the sweeping staircase. The grand foyer was empty, but she could see two of Dominic's men standing outside the front doors, silhouetted through the frosted glass. She moved silently down the hallway toward Leo's study. The heavy oak door was closed, but it wasn't soundproof. She pressed her back against the wall right beside the frame, holding her breath. Inside, ice clinked into a glass. "I have to admit, Castiglione," a new voice drawled. It was a dry, weary voice. Inspector Wallace. "I expected more security, given that Carlo Moretti just tried to turn you into Swiss cheese on Interstate 95. "I don't know what you're talking about, Inspector." Leo's voice was smooth, completely devoid of the exhaustion Nora knew he was feeling. It was his public mask, perfectly fitted. "I was at home all afternoon. We had a minor security breach at the gate. Kids pulling a prank." Wallace let out a low chuckle. "Kids with fully automatic rifles. Right. Look, Leo, let's skip the theater. I'm off the clock. I didn't bring a wire. Dominic checked my teeth." "Then why are you here, James?" "To offer you a lifeline." The sound of a leather chair creaking. "Hayes is singing. The feds are drafting the RACO charges as we speak. They have the shell companies. They have the routing numbers. But most importantly, Hayes is giving them the union bosses." There was a long silence. Nora closed her eyes. The union bosses were the lifeblood of Leo's legitimate shipping empire. If they fell, the infrastructure collapsed. "The feds want a headline," Wallace continued. "They want the governor. But I want you, Leo. I've always wanted you. So, here's the deal. You flip. You give me Carlo Moretti. You give me the supply lines, the drop points, everything Moretti uses to pump fentanyl into this city. You do that. And I pull strings at the DA's office to lose the Hayes indictments against you." Nora's breath caught in her throat. Wallace was asking Leo to become an informant, to break the sacred oath of Omerta. Leo's laugh was dark, echoing ominously through the heavy door. "You want me to do your job for you? You think I'd rat out a rival just to save my own skin?" "I think you're a businessman," Wallace countered sharply. "And right now, your business is failing. Moretti is smelling blood in the water. He knows you're weak without the political cover. If he misses today, he tries again tomorrow. Eventually, he doesn't miss. Let him try." "It's not just about you anymore, Leo," Wallace's voice raised, hitting a note of genuine frustration. "You think Moretti gives a damn about the old rules? He doesn't care about wives or families. You go to war with him, he won't just come for you. He'll put a bomb under your wife's car while she's at one of her little charity luncheons." Nora's blood ran cold. She pressed her hand flat against the wall to steady herself. Inside the room, the silence was deafening. It stretched for 10 agonizing seconds. When Leo finally spoke, his voice was so quiet, so devoid of human emotion, it sounded like a machine. "Inspector," Leo whispered, "if you ever mention my wife's name again, I will cut out your tongue and mail it to your precinct. I'm trying to save her life, you arrogant son of a bitch, Wallace snapped. You think you can protect her? You can't even protect yourself on the highway. You take this deal, you walk away clean. You take your millions, you take Nora, and you disappear to Europe. You don't take it. You're both dead by Christmas. Nora heard the sudden scrape of a chair, followed by the heavy, meaty thud of a body being slammed against a wall. A choked gasp came from Wallace. Leo! Nora didn't realize she was moving until her hand slammed into the oak door, pushing it open. The scene inside the study was frozen in violence. Leo had Wallace pinned against the mahogany bookshelves by the throat, his massive forearm pressing against the inspector's windpipe. Wallace's face was turning a dangerous shade of purple, his hands clawing uselessly at Leo's iron grip. Leo's head snapped toward the door. His eyes were wild, fully consumed by the violent beast he usually kept caged. I told you to stay upstairs, Leo snarled, his voice a guttural roar. Let him go, Nora demanded, stepping into the room. She wasn't trembling. The fear had burned away, replaced by a fierce, protective fury of her own. Drop him, Leo. Now! Leo's chest heaved. He looked from Nora to the gasping inspector, the muscles in his jaw ticking frantically. Slowly, agonizingly, he lowered his arm and stepped back. Wallace collapsed to the floor, coughing violently, clutching his throat. Leo didn't look at the man on the floor. His eyes were locked on Nora. The betrayal in his gaze was evident. She had witnessed the monster unchained. Nora walked past Leo, ignoring the heavy, bloody tension in the air. She stood over Wallace. Get up, Inspector, she said, her voice freezing. Wallace scrambled to his feet, wheezing, leaning against the desk for support. He looked at Nora, a twisted mixture of pity and horror in his eyes. You need to get out of this house, Mrs. Castiglione, before it becomes your tomb. The door is behind you, James, Nora said flatly, borrowing Leo's cold authority. And if you ever come onto this property and threaten my family again, you won't leave. Wallace stared at her for a long second, realizing the terrible truth. She wasn't a hostage, she was an accomplice. He straightened his coat, shot one last venomous glare at Leo, and walked out of the room. Nora waited until she heard the heavy front doors close. She turned to face Leo. He was standing in the center of the room, his fists clenched, his breathing ragged. The exertion had torn the wound on his shoulder. A fresh patch of crimson was blooming through his dark sweater. Are we going to die, Leo? She asked, her voice cracking for the first time. Leo crossed the room in 2 strides. He didn't answer. Instead, he pulled her against his chest, wrapping his arms around her so tightly she could barely breathe. He buried his face in her hair, trembling. It was the first time she had ever felt him shake. No, he whispered against her neck, a vow sealed in blood and desperation. I'm going to kill them all. The house held a different kind of silence on Wednesday morning. It was the heavy, waiting stillness of a drawn bow. Leo was running a war from the dining room. The massive mahogany table, usually reserved for Thanksgiving dinners Nora barely touched, was covered in blueprints, shipping manifests, and burner phones. Dominic and 3 other lieutenants stood around it, their voices hushed, their expressions carved from stone. They were orchestrating a bloodbath. Nora could hear the fragmented commands as she passed the open doors. Burn the warehouse on 5th. Cut the brake lines on his captain's Lincoln. Leave him in the street. She walked into the kitchen. Maria was polishing silver, her face expressionless. Nora poured a cup of black coffee and leaned against the granite counter. She wasn't going to wait in a concrete box while Leo tore the city apart. Moretti had crossed a line, but Leo was responding with blunt force. Blunt force made noise. Noise brought the feds. If Leo waged a street war, Inspector Wallace wouldn't even need Hayes's testimony. He'd have a dozen fresh bodies to build a RICO case on. Nora walked back upstairs to her dressing room. She bypassed the silk dresses and pulled a tailored charcoal blazer and slacks from the rack. She dressed methodically, brushing her hair back into a tight, severe knot. She sat at her vanity, opened the hidden compartment beneath the jewelry drawer, and pulled out a small, leather-bound book. Leo controlled the streets. He controlled the ports. But Nora controlled the social registry. She spent her days sitting in the country club dining rooms with the wives of mayors, judges, and state senators. Women who drank too much gin and talked too loudly about their husbands' indiscretions. Women who felt invisible, and so they spilled their secrets to the quiet, elegant Mafia wife who never judged. She flipped to a page near the middle. Cynthia Hayes, the governor's wife. Cynthia had sat crying in Nora's solarium 3 months ago, terrified because she had found bank statements her husband left in his golf bag. Accounts in the Cayman Islands. Accounts that didn't match his government salary or his campaign funds. Leo didn't use offshore accounts for bribes. He used local shell companies with clean domestic paperwork. The Cayman accounts didn't belong to Leo. They belonged to whoever else was buying Richard Hayes. Nora picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in 2 years. It belonged to an investigative reporter at the Times who owed her foundation a massive favor. "Frank," Nora said when the line clicked open. She kept her voice even, devoid of the adrenaline spiking in her chest. "I have a file. Routing numbers. Wire transfers linking Governor Hayes to a holding company owned by Carlo Moretti. I need it on the front page of the digital edition in 1 hour." There was a stunned silence on the other end. "Nora, if I run this, the FBI pivots straight to Moretti. It blows the DA's current narrative out of the water." "That's the point, Frank. 1 hour, or I give it to the Tribune." She hung up. She walked downstairs, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood. She didn't stop at the dining room. She walked straight in, ignoring the sudden silence that fell over the table. 4 hardened killers stared at her. She looked at Leo. He was leaning over a map of the docks, a cigar clamped in his teeth, his injured shoulder stiff but functional. He looked up, his dark eyes narrowing at her attire. "What are you doing, Nora?" he asked softly. "Canceling your war," she said. She dropped a duplicate folder of the offshore records onto the center of the table, right over the map of the docks. Moretti bought Hayes 3 years ago to move product through the municipal airports. Hayes panicked when the state attorney started digging. He was going to feed the feds our shell companies to protect Moretti's offshore accounts. Leo stared at the folder. He didn't touch it. "Where did you get this?" "From his wife, months ago. I didn't know what it meant then. I know what it means now." Nora stepped closer to the table. She didn't break eye contact with her husband. "You start shooting up the streets today. The FBI uses the noise to bury you. But in 45 minutes, the Times is going to publish a leak proving Moretti is the one bankrolling the governor's treason. Inspector Wallace wants a headline. I just gave him one. Moretti will have a federal warrant on his head by noon. Dominic let out a low, slow whistle. The other lieutenants exchanged uneasy glances. Leo's jaw ticked. He slowly removed the cigar from his mouth, setting it in a crystal ashtray. He looked at the lieutenants. "Get out!" They didn't hesitate. The room emptied in less than 10 seconds, the heavy doors pulling shut behind them. Leo stood up. He walked around the massive table, his movements slow, predatory. He stopped inches from her. The anger rolling off him was palpable, but it wasn't directed at Moretti anymore. It was directed at her. "You went behind my back." "I saved your empire," Nora shot back, her chin tilting up. "You build walls, Leo. You put me in towers and bunkers and armored cars, and you think that makes me safe. But the walls were caving in. You can't shoot your way out of a federal indictment." He reached out, his hand wrapping around her throat. It wasn't a chokehold. It was a grip of absolute, terrifying possession. His thumb rested against her pulse point, feeling the frantic, hammering rhythm of her heart. He backed her up against the edge of the mahogany table. "You put a target on your own back," Leo breathed, his voice a harsh scrape of sound. "If Moretti finds out you leaked those files—" "He won't have time to find out," Nora interrupted, her voice entirely steady despite the hand on her neck. She reached up and placed her hand over his. "The feds are going to tear his life apart. His accounts will be frozen. His men will scatter. He's going to be a ghost, Leo. And ghosts don't win wars." Leo stared at her. The fury in his eyes slowly fractured, revealing something far more dangerous beneath it. Awe. He was looking at her not as a possession to be guarded, but as a weapon he hadn't realized he was holding. He released her throat, his hand sliding down to grip her waist, pulling her flush against him. "You are reckless," he murmured, burying his face in the crook of her neck. "I learned from the best," she whispered. By 2 p.m. the city was on fire, metaphorically, at least. The Times article had hit like a seismic charge. Governor Hayes's legal team was scrambling, issuing frantic denials. The FBI, furious that their quiet investigation had been blown wide open by a press leak, immediately shifted gears. Warrants were expedited. Sitting in his study, Leo watched the news feed on a muted monitor. Carlo Moretti's primary legitimate business, a waste management firm in Queens, was currently being raided by 50 heavily armed federal agents. Moretti was bleeding out on the public stage. The phone on Leo's desk buzzed, a direct line. Only 3 people in the world had the number. He picked it up. "Speak, Castiglione." Moretti's voice was a wet, ragged rasp. The smug arrogance from the day before was entirely gone, replaced by the cornered panic of a hunted animal. "You think you're clever, you piece of trash? You think paper stops me?" "You're a dead man, Carlo," Leo said calmly, leaning back in his leather chair. "You just don't know it yet. Your accounts are frozen. Your politicians are singing. Your captains are realizing they're tied to a sinking ship." "I know it was you," Moretti spat. "I have men left. I have enough to burn that estate to the ground. I'll make you watch while I skin her." Leo didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He simply let a profound, chilling silence fill the line. "You have no men, Carlo," Leo finally said. "Check your perimeter." There was a pause on the line. Then, the faint sound of Moretti's voice shouting an order to someone in his room. A moment later, a sickening thud echoed through the receiver, followed by a wet, choking sound. "I bought your head of security an hour ago," Leo told the dead air. "It cost me $2 million. A bargain, considering what you tried to do to my wife." Leo hung up the phone. He reached across the desk, snapped the burner phone in half, and dropped it into the metal wastebasket. The war was over. No street battles, no collateral damage. Just a quiet, surgical strike funded by paper and executed by a traitor. The door to the study opened. Nora stood in the threshold. She had taken her hair down, the dark strands falling over the shoulders of her blazer. She looked at the television screen, watching the federal agents hauling boxes out of Moretti's building. Then she looked at Leo. "Is it done?" she asked. "It's done." Leo stood up. The heavy exhaustion that had plagued him for 48 hours seemed to have evaporated. He looked lethal, refined, and completely in control. "Moretti won't be a problem for us, or for the feds." Nora didn't ask for details. She had spent 10 years learning not to ask questions when the answers involved blood. She walked slowly into the room, stopping in front of the desk. "Inspector Wallace called," she said quietly. "He left a voicemail on the house line. He said the DA is dropping the subpoenas for our shell companies. They have enough on Moretti to leverage Hayes for a federal conviction. They don't need us anymore." Leo walked around the desk. He stopped in front of her, his dark eyes searching her face. He was searching for the crack. He was waiting for the revulsion to set in, waiting for her to realize the true depth of the darkness she had just waded into. "You crossed a line today, Nora," he said, his voice a low rumble in his chest. "You stepped into the arena. You can never unstep. I know. You play this game, you get blood on your hands. The feds might back off today, but there's always another Wallace. Always another Moretti." He reached out, his knuckles grazing her cheekbone. "You can't hide behind the charity galas and the silk dresses anymore. They know what you are now." "I'm your wife," Nora said, not backing away from his touch. The cynicism was gone, replaced by a cold, settling clarity. She finally understood the mechanics of her own cage. She hadn't been locked in to be kept docile. She had been locked in to be kept clean. But clean was an illusion. Clean was a luxury that cost lives. "I don't want to hide, Leo," she said, her voice steady. "I don't want to stand in a ballroom while politicians grope me, pretending I don't know where the money comes from. We survive together, or we burn together. But no more secrets, no more keeping me in the dark." Leo stared at her. The possessive fury that had defined their marriage shifted, settling into something far deeper, far more terrifying. Partnership. He didn't say a word. He leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't the desperate, frantic kiss of the night before. It was a seal, a pact. His mouth was hard, demanding, tasting of whiskey and ruin. Nora kissed him back, letting the heavy, suffocating weight of their reality wash over her. She belonged to the dark now, just as much as he did. 6 months later, the winter air was brutal, biting through the heavy wool of Nora's coat as she stepped out of the armored SUV. The Beaumont Hotel looked exactly the same as it had in August. The same valet, the same crystal chandeliers visible through the grand glass doors. It was the annual Mayor's Charity Gala. Again. Thomas, the driver, stood by the open door, his face impassive. Dominic was already on the pavement, scanning the crowd of reporters and photographers huddled behind the velvet ropes. Leo stepped out of the vehicle on the other side. He adjusted his cuffs, his tuxedo immaculate. The bullet graze on his shoulder had healed into a jagged white scar, a hidden map of violence beneath the tailored silk. He walked around the back of the car and offered Nora his arm. She took it. She wore a high-necked gown of dark emerald velvet. No exposed skin, no vulnerability. They walked up the carpet together. The flashbulbs erupted, blinding and frantic. The press yelled their names. "Mr. Castiglione! Mrs. Castiglione! Over here!" The city knew exactly who they were. Carlo Moretti was dead. Richard Hayes was serving a 20-year sentence in federal prison. And Leo Castiglione's empire had doubled in size, untouched by the state attorney's office. They were untouchable. They were royalty. They stepped into the grand ballroom. The jazz band was playing a slow, mournful tune. The effect was instantaneous. The mindless chatter died. The clinking of glasses ceased. 300 of the city's wealthiest residents stopped to look at the doorway. The new governor, a nervous man who had won on a reform platform, was standing near the ice sculpture. He caught Leo's eye. The governor swallowed hard, nodded sharply in respect, and immediately turned his back, giving them a wide berth. No one approached them. No one offered a sleazy smile or a lingering touch. The men looked at Leo with naked fear. The women looked at Nora with a mixture of terror and envy. They knew she wasn't just the wife anymore. The rumors of how Moretti fell had circulated through the country clubs and the boardrooms. They whispered that the boss was ruthless, but the wife was the one who pulled the strings. Leo leaned down, his mouth brushing against Nora's ear. "Are you bored yet?" he murmured, the rough edge of his voice vibrating against her skin. Nora looked across the sea of terrified, hypocritical faces. The cage was gone. She had traded it for a throne made of glass and extortion, and God help her, she didn't want to give it back. She offered a thin, mechanical smile to a passing alderman, watching the man practically flinch in response. "A little," Nora whispered back, her fingers tightening on Leo's arm. "Give it 20 minutes, then we leave." Leo's dark eyes gleamed with a predatory satisfaction. He placed his heavy hand over hers, sealing her to his side. "Whatever you want, Mrs. Castiglione." They walked into the crowd, the sea of wolves parting entirely for the monsters who had learned to hunt together. The evolution of Nora from a sheltered wife to a ruthless queen is complete. Leo and Nora didn't just survive the war. They rewrote the rules of the city and claimed their throne together. This dark, high-stakes mafia romance proves that sometimes the most dangerous player in the room is the one everyone underestimates. If you love this intense, gritty story of power and devotion, hit that like button and share it with fellow romance fans. Subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss our next thrilling audio drama. Let me know in the comments. Did Nora make the right choice? See you next time.